What's that?
It's the none of your damn business alarm.
Hello everybody, Max Scoville here for Rev3 Games, and I'm here to talk to you about Injustice: Gods Among Us. Now, Injustice: Gods Among Us is a pretty simple idea. You press buttons on a controller, and then some DC super characters hit each other on your screen of choice. Now, this should be a pretty foolproof mechanic, but numerous games in the past have proven it's pretty easy to screw up. Does Injustice do it justice? Let's find out. At a glance, Injustice: Gods Among Us might just look like a DC Universe flavored remix of Mortal Kombat 9. And while both games are made by NetherRealm Studios using more or less the same engine, Injustice introduces a handful of fresh ideas to set itself apart as a unique new entry in the fighting game genre. Before we get into the meat of the review, I want to address a couple initial concerns I know some people have about Injustice. Comic book fans are having a hard time stomaching the idea that members of the Justice League would beat each other up, and that's something Injustice explains surprisingly well. A handful of characters from the regular vanilla DC universe get sucked into an alternate dimension where some bad stuff happened, and Superman turned into a fascist ruler of Earth and a total jerk. As for why non-superpowered characters like the Joker are now somehow able to withstand intense amounts of physical injury and somehow survive, well, it's apparently because of some reverse-engineered Kryptonian nanomachines. Yep, good old nanomachines. And, you know, also it's a video game about fictional characters, so if you take things with a grain of salt and very loosely suspend your disbelief, you'll have a good time. Now, in terms of gameplay, the most obvious change Injustice makes to the standard fighting game formula is its use of interactive environments. Every level is littered with various props and set pieces that can be used in combat with the press of a button. Whenever a player is in the right position, a cue will flash next to their life bar. In the 360 version, it's the right bumper. And a well-timed button press will allow that player's character to hurl a dumpster at the opponent, uproot a tree and use it as a bludgeon, or trigger a wide variety of other little slapstick events. Beyond interactive props, the environments themselves are massive by fighting game standards, and the classic Mortal Kombat mechanic of uppercutting your opponent through the ceiling into another area has been expanded to involve punching that player through several walls and watching them ricochet about like a pinball before something heavy probably falls on them, and then they stand up and continue fighting. The attention paid to the environments in Injustice really helps maintain the sense of it being set in a physical place. A lot of fighting game arenas are just colorful backdrops that have little to no connection to the characters, aside from the occasional looped animation of a cheering fan. In Injustice, the levels are gradually destroyed as superpowered metahumans duke it out, and in spite of the over-top comic book absurdity of the game, this manages to keep it slightly grounded. Environmental stuff is all well and good, but the core focus of any fighting game is obviously melee combat. And in typical NetherRealm fashion, there's a wide variety of complex special moves and combos, but it's still just a lot of fun to mash buttons.
Wakey, wakey!
In addition to light, medium, and heavy attacks, every character has one unique character trait move, which can be used repeatedly during a match, but has a recharge time after each use. Some traits take longer than others to activate, so figuring out how to mix them in with your regular attacks and combos adds an element of strategy. Some of the traits are offensive, like Green Arrow shooting arrows, and some are defensive. Like, for instance, Aquaman just gets really wet, which I guess just makes him tougher or something, but mostly he just looks gross. It's also probably worth noting that there's no dedicated block button other than pressing back on the D-pad. To a certain degree, the quality of fighting game combat depends on how it's being played. I played Injustice on Xbox 360, and as most fighting game fans can tell you, the 360 controller's D-pad is about as useful as a fistful of wet garbage for performing any kind of precision moves. While plenty of players will get the hang of it just fine, I resorted to button mashing my way through portions of the game. If you're playing on PS3 or using a fight stick, you might not have any problems at all, but considering that Injustice is a brand new console game with no arcade lineage or demands from a pre-existing fanbase, I feel like NetherRealm could have optimized the controls a bit more for use with squishy controllers. One area in which Injustice faltered for me is with the introduction of the Clash feature, which is a short wager match event that acts as a combo breaker. I respect NetherRealm's attempt to try something new, but for me the Clash system felt really out of place, and in the midst of a heated fight, it was more distracting than fun. Every character has a super move, which can be activated by pressing both triggers after filling up their super meter. These super moves are like a cross between fatalities and X-ray attacks in Mortal Kombat. I'm going to warn you right now, if you want realistic games, you should look elsewhere because the super moves are just completely preposterous. I'm going to go on record right now and say that Aquaman's super move is a selling point for this game. Since he's the Prince of Atlantis, whose most notable ability is to communicate with fish, Aquaman summons a massive tidal wave, which is filled with like a greatest hits collection of marine life, and then the entire level floods, and Aquaman impales his opponent on his trident, holds them over his head, and the most anatomically incorrect shark ever swims by and eats them. And the best thing about this is that it's the same no matter what level you're playing in. You could be fighting in outer space, and a tidal wave full of fish and sharks and stuff is still gonna come through the wall. It makes no sense, and it's completely idiotic, and I love it.
Time to kick my ass.
So yeah, if you're the kind of person who can turn off your brain a bit and enjoy stupid video games, you will have an absolute blast with Injustice. The story campaign hops between different heroes and villains, giving players a sampling of the 24-character roster, and it does a surprisingly good job at actually weaving a cohesive story. The writing and voice acting veers into cornball territory periodically, but most of the time it's either solid or delightfully tongue-in-cheek. Not everybody wants their video games to be cinematic, but Injustice finds an impressive balance between stupid popcorn action movie and fast-paced fighting game, with cutscenes and gameplay flowing into each other almost seamlessly. To keep things interesting, there are also a handful of mini-games scattered between battles, sort of like Test Your Might, but with a bit more variety. If you have a problem with the character designs in Mortal Kombat or in some of the more recent DC comics, then Injustice might be a bit rough on the eyes, since, as you might expect, it looks like a combination of the two. There's excessive shiny armor-plated muscles on all the dudes, and an emphasis on cleavage and butt cheeks and whale tails for the ladies, but if you can overlook that, the game has a ton of polish, and in spite of some tacky costumes, it looks great in action. In addition to the single-player campaign, there are also battles, which are essentially just a selection of tournament ladders, as well as 240 Star Labs missions, which are themed fights and mini-games akin to the Challenge Tower in Mortal Kombat. There are a ton of unlockables like costumes and concept art and music, and a character model gallery, which is great if you want to look at Aquaman's butt. Yeah! Get in there, girl.
I'm taking Doomsday into deep space.
Make sure it's very deep space.
Obviously, multiplayer is a major component of fighting games, and Injustice features your standard local versus mode, as well as ranked matches online. In addition to your typical 1v1 versus matches, there are also survival and King of the Hill modes. One of the bigger complaints about Mortal Kombat was the heavy lag during online play. During my time with Injustice, I didn't run into any problems, but I was also playing the game against only a handful of other people online, so if your enjoyment of a fighting game hinges on the online experience, you might want to wait a week and see what the consensus is after the servers are open to the unwashed masses. With the world of esports constantly growing, it's worth noting that NetherRealm has made some accommodations for the hardcore competitive crowd. In addition to a complete moves list, the pause screen also displays detailed info about each attack on a detailed technical level, with information like exact damage and frame data. On top of that, there's also a favorites option, which allows the button combos for moves of the player's choice to be pinned on screen for quick reference. While Injustice takes measures to please the hardcore crowd, it's worth noting that it also goes a long way to be accessible to people who might not be so hype about fighting games, but still want to play a game where Aquaman gets punched in the face. I know accessible isn't considered a good thing by everyone, but the single-player campaign alone really goes above and beyond what we expect from fighting games, both in terms of story and presentation, and that's just a small portion of what the game has to offer. The combat is hectic and gratifying, and between the brutal, cinematic super moves and the interactive environments, Injustice is the video game equivalent of bashing together a couple of action figures in a giant playset full of spring-loaded projectiles and breakaway walls. In spite of a few minor nitpicks, I had a lot of fun with the game, and most importantly, I got to punch Aquaman in the face. Injustice: Gods Among Us gets a 4 out of 5. Yep, I sure hate Aquaman. Anyway, Injustice: Gods Among Us. It's a lot of fun. You should definitely check it out. If you have any questions or comments, I will do my best to answer them in the comment section below. I'm Max Scoville for Rev3 Games. Check out the rest of our stuff. It's fun, but it doesn't involve Aquaman. I'll see you guys later.